First, from Fox at 3 o'clock in New York City, the high-stakes battle over President Obama's health care overhaul has reached the nation's highest court. Today, marking the beginning of 6 hours, scheduled hours of arguments over 3 days. The court hasn't given that much time to a single case in decades, and the outcome could really make or break the president's signature legislative achievement just months before Election Day. A new CBS News, New York Times newspaper poll shows 47% of Americans currently disapprove of the health care overhaul. 36% of those polled say they support it. The controversial law is aimed at extending health insurance to more than 30 million Americans. Among other things, it bars insurance companies from denying coverage to people with pre-existing conditions and limits how much they can charge older people. But the most contentious issue here is the requirement that people buy health insurance, and if they don't, they have to pay a penalty. Critics say it's unconstitutional, a violation of personal freedom. The question is, can Congress force people to buy something? Shannon Bream is on Fox Top Story, live outside the Supreme Court this afternoon. And the first question today is whether the court should really even be hearing this case. Shannon?
And Shepard, it's all because of an 1867 tax law that says you can't challenge a tax in court until you've already had to pay it. So some folks say you've got to wait until the mandate kicks in 2014. Somebody refuses to comply, has to pay the penalty. Is that a tax? Meaning the justices have to wait until 2015 or beyond to consider the case. Well, the justices were so concerned about that possibility, they actually brought in an outside attorney not connected to the case. His name is Bob Long. They gave him 40 minutes to argue that position, that the case is not yet ripe. But he met with plenty of skeptics, including Justice Stephen Breyer. Here's what Justice Breyer had to say.
Congress has nowhere used the word tax. What it says is penalty. Moreover, this is not in the Internal Revenue Code, but for purposes of collection. And so why is this a tax?
We heard from 8 of the 9 justices today, and I got to tell you, Shep, many of them seem skeptical.
What's the government's position on this, Shannon?
It's been back and forth because you may remember that the president was talking about the health care bill before it actually was passed into law in 2009, saying it did not represent a tax. Well, now the government in lower court proceedings did argue that it was a tax. It is a tough position that the Solicitor General Don Verrilli, the government's top lawyer, had to argue today. Justice Samuel Alito pointed out the contradiction. Take a listen.
General Verrilli, today you're arguing that the penalty is not a tax. Tomorrow you're going to be back and you'll be arguing that the penalty is a tax.
And of course, that is a reference to tomorrow when they get to the argument over the individual mandate, and the government will argue that it's a legitimate use of Congress's taxing power. Shep.
Shannon Bream at the court on a windy day in Washington. Shannon, great to see you. This is a big deal to a lot of people. For more on it, let's go to our senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Tell us about how this thing is breaking down and what exactly went on today again. Now
the court is not supposed to hear a case unless it is timely. In other words, you just can't ask the court to declare a statute unconstitutional because you think it's unconstitutional. You have to have been harmed by it, or the harm coming your way has to be fairly clear. Ordinarily, the court decides when the case is timely. The legal phrase is ripeness. Is it ripe? In the case of paying taxes, Congress has decided when it is timely for the court to hear a challenge to a tax. And Congress has said, you want to challenge a tax, you pay it first. You give us the money first, and then you challenge whether or not we have the right to take it from you. This is a very small portion of this case, Shep. The big portion that most people are concerned about, which you just articulated, which will be argued tomorrow, is whether or not the Congress can force you to buy health care insurance. But one aspect of that is, if you don't buy it, the Congress will extract money from you. Question, is that extraction a penalty, or is that extraction a tax? If it is a tax, then this 150-year-old statute which says you got to pay the tax before you can challenge it may kick in. But from the sentiment of those in the courtroom today, and from listening to the oral argument, a portion of which you just played, it is very clear. These justices want to hear this as much as we want them to hear it. They want to rule on it as much as we want an answer to it. They're not going to let this 150-year-old tax law interfere with whether or not they can rule on this case.
Do they want to rule on it so badly because it's political and because it could help determine the course of human events in this country, or for other reasons?
Well, that's a very good question. Sometimes the justices do time their rulings. Think about it this way. If the court invalidates this health care mandate, would that help the president, who could say, look, I tried to do what I thought was right, and Republican appointees to the court invalidated it? Or will it hurt the president because it will enable his opponent to say, look, the court invalidated this, and the president should have known it all along? I think the court wants to get heavy cases off its docket so it can get back to its normal routine. And if they're anxious to resolve this, it's a normal human anxiety. It's not an effort to want to influence the presidential election.
What takes this case to the level that they would have longer arguments on this than anything in decades?
I think they want to show respect to the Congress for a 2,600-page statute.
Wow.
And they want to show respect to the states which have challenged it, because 26 of the states have challenged it.
All with the Republican attorneys general.
That's probably true. These challenges are executive decisions, not legislative decisions. Right. And I think they want to show deference to the public, which seems to have an overriding interest in the outcome of this case. This length of time is unusual, but there are many, many arguments and many, many litigants, and I think the court wants to fairly say, whichever way we go, we gave everybody ample time to speak.
Got a prediction? Based on what you know about these justices?
Well, based upon what I know, I think they're going to invalidate the individual mandate. I think they're going to say that there is a limit to what Congress can order people to do. Whether that invalidation affects the rest of the case is something that can't be predicted.
All right, Judge, should be an interesting, three days?
Should be a very interesting week. Yeah, this is going to happen tomorrow and Wednesday as well.
All right. Judge, thanks.
Pleasure, Shep.
Well, the wife of the